Hey guys, welcome to the last unit of the year. It is ecology. Our learning targets for our two main learning targets to start with in this unit, we have describing the trends of energy transfer through ecosystems. So how does energy go from one level to the next? How do you get energy? How do other organisms get energy? And what happens with that, the nutrients and the energy that is flowing through our ecosystems. Second, today we're going to look at how matter flows. It's not just nutrients, but there's also matter. We're gonna be specifically looking at the carbon cycle. We're gonna look at abiotic and biotic components and how carbon cycles through those things. So, first learning target. Let's get this on your sheet. First learning target on top of your note sheet there. Please write down: describe the trends in energy transfer through ecosystems, developing mathematical model related to trophic levels, and use the data to organize trophic levels into a food chain. So, if you need to pause the video, do so and write that down. So let's start with our notes. Well, we need to start with the passage that you got, passage on photosynthesis and cell respiration. As you can see, you need to color code the requirements, the products, who and why. So please do that at this time. Pause the video, color code your passage. So we are looking at the two processes, photosynthesis and respiration. What are the requirements for each process? What products do you get out of them? Who is using them? And why are they necessary? So pause the video and color code your passage. All right, so now that you've color coded the passage, we're going to look at the specifics and what we're going to do with that information. So, on your note sheet, here's what I need you to do. You use the paragraphs. Now I need you to complete these diagrams that are on your note sheet. So, when you look at this, photosynthesis is the first one there. What are the products and the components? So, like, what are the requirements that we need to start photosynthesis, and what products do we get out of that? So please answer this on your note sheet. You should be able to use the information from your passage. If you know the chemical symbols, like like oxygen is O2, or carbon dioxide is CO2. If you know those different chemical formulas for stuff, add that in here as well, instead of writing just a word. So pause the video and write that in. So one of the biggest things that we need you to get out of this information, and we'll discuss this during class, I want you guys to take a look at the two equations. What relationship do you see between these two equations? I want you to think about that, and in the little space below these two equations, just write a short little synopsis. What do you notice about the equation for photosynthesis and how it relates to respiration? One thing I do want to point out that a lot of people miss, in case you missed this as well, when you look at cell respiration, so right here, respiration is used by, a lot of people miss something. They usually list like animals and animals and organisms that they're used to, like rabbits or cats, dogs, humans. But you forget in many cases that all living things use respiration, which means the plants that hopefully you identified in photosynthesis, they also use respiration. They need to use some of the energy that they are creating so that they can grow and they can go through their everyday functions. So all living things go through respiration, not just the animals that a lot of people think about. But on the flip side of that, when you talk about photosynthesis, there aren't any animals that go through photosynthesis. So respiration is used by all living things, but photosynthesis is just used by our producers or plants, as you guys know them. All right, so continue with your notes. We got food chains. Our food chains show a feeding relationship. Food chains are a very simple way of showing a relationship, like this eats this, and this eats this, so on and so forth. You know, that kind of picture of, here's the tiny little fish, and that tiny little fish gets eaten by a bigger fish, and a bigger fish, and a bigger fish, and at the end you got the biggest fish that's eating all the fish and consuming all of that energy. But I want you guys to realize that a food chain is not a realistic representation of how it works. A food chain is just showing a progression from one level to another, but we're going to look at later on in notes something that shows a more realistic relationship. But here's a food chain. So all food chains start with energy from sun. That's a little bit of false information, just letting you know. There are some very specific creatures here on Earth that don't necessarily need the sun to start a food chain. But for this class and for 98% of all food chains out there, the energy has to start with the sun. That solar energy coming in from that giant ball of fire in the sky. Now, who is taking that in? Well, that would be our first level. Those are our plants. First level in our producers or our plants, they absorb that energy, and then that energy that's stored within them can be transferred on. And so that after that, the energy is transferred up the food chain. So you think about like something that eats the grass, and then something eats the thing that eats the grass. So we have our gazelle here, and then that gazelle is eaten by the lion. So that is a food chain. Now, all of these things, if you take a look, I'm just going to back up here. So we have the sun, which isn't part of our trophic levels. Our trophic levels start here. So if we look at our first level here, at the very bottom, so this is our green level, and there's a reason why it's green, because those are producers. Our producers are the first set of organisms. They bring in that energy. Some of the energy that they produce, they store, and some of the energy they use for going through their day-to-day functions. So those are our producers. They're using that solar energy. After our producers, those are our primary consumers. So primary consumers are organisms that eat the producers, straight up eat the producers. Our secondary consumers eat consumers. Now, this is a little bit tricky because sometimes you get a primary consumer that could be eating a producer in one case, but also eats meat as acts like a carnivore in other cases. For example, a bear. A bear in many cases is an omnivore. So an omnivore is something that eats both producers and meat. So this isn't a perfect system, but when you get up to the secondary consumer level, that is going to be something that eats only other meat. Okay, so they're not going to be eating the producers, so on and so forth. But again, we have to think about this as not being a perfect system, but just understand the level. So producers, and then primary consumers, and then secondary consumers, and there's actually another level that's called tertiary consumers. So that's even above that. So that's like the top of the food chain, right? Within these trophic levels, there's this 10% rule. The 10% rule is an interesting kind of idea that only if you look at the numbers here, so 100% of the energy that's available in an ecosystem starts with the producers. The energy, so now you have your primary consumers like herbivores, they are going to consume the producers, but only 10% of the energy that was stored here is actually available to them. And then only 10% moves up to the next level, and only 10% moves up to the next level. So if you think about this, and I want you guys to think about the big picture. If you were to think about the big picture of this, what does that mean about the amount of food that needs to be consumed by these organisms up here versus these organisms down here? And then if you think about humans, if you think about this, what kind of diet is better and actually fills your energy, your nutrient requirements better so that you get everything you need? Is it a vegetarian diet? Is it an omnivorous diet, or is it being a carnivore? So if you think about how the energy transfer happens here, think about what kind of diet would be best for humans, and which one you would need to consume more food to get the energy that you need. Now on your note sheet, there's a couple other questions. So let me bring up the note sheet. All right, so if you take a look at what I want you to do on your note sheet, obviously how much energy gets transferred from level to level, you can answer that. In what form does the energy get stored? So here's what I want you to think about. I need you to think about our macromolecule unit. When we talked about our amino acids, our carbohydrates, our lipids, those kind of things, how does energy actually get stored? Well, think about it. If you, as a human, were to eat too much food, how does your body store that extra food, the extra energy that a lot of people don't like? Okay, so I want you to think about what form does that energy get stored in. And in another instance, if you think about plants, what kind of macromolecule was in the passage, how are they storing energy for later usage or for other organisms to consume. So there's two different things you need to identify here in what form the energy gets stored in. And it goes back to our macromolecules. If you need help, you can always wait to look at the carbon video, which you're going to get, and it kind of gives you a little bit more of a hint. So if you don't understand right now, or if you don't remember, save that for later, and then hopefully your memory will be jogged when we get to the next video, which is carbon cycling. Now, I hope you can do your math. The next question here is how much energy doesn't make it to the next level? So if it's the 10% rule, I hope you're able to answer how much energy isn't making it to the next level. Now, we need to answer this. What does the, oh my gosh, there's a misspelling on here and I just realized it. What does the energy go? It should be where does the energy go? Okay, so where does the energy go? So let's take a look at where this energy actually goes. So we know that energy is moving up the trophic levels, and we already said that 10% of it moves on. But what happens to the other part? So the energy that gets stored is that 10%, but that leaves, hopefully you've done the math and you've realized that that 90%, something has to happen to it. So where does it actually go? Well, the energy is actually lost, and there's many different forms. So the energy is lost, quote unquote, lost. But when we think about the energy being lost, it's not necessarily lost, but if you think about, like, right now, you're a warm-blooded creature. If you feel your skin, if you were to take your arm, this is my arm right here, and I were to feel my arm, I can feel heat. Well, I'm giving off heat. Well, where does that heat go? It just goes off into somewhere, and that energy is lost because we can't capture it again. But there's other things that that energy goes to. So think about this. 90% of that energy is lost. Well, where does that go? It goes into these things. Your everyday function. It allows you to go through cellular respiration, so the all your cells producing energy. It goes in, if you're still growing, you're always growing because you're producing new cells through your mitosis. Your hair is growing. All those things is growing. And then you have digestion. It takes energy to digest your food, so it's kind of weird that it takes energy to get energy. And that's just how it works. Reproduction, movement, you could go on and on and on. Okay? So, this is where that energy goes. So if you need to write these down, please pause the video. These are the costs of living, are all of these things. And like I said, you could probably name a couple more. Now, what I need you to do is on your note sheet. On your note sheet here, there is a section. Whoops, wrong one. There is a section on here where I want you to take and just put the numbers next to these organisms. So which of these organisms are producers, primary consumers, secondary consumers, tertiary consumers? Which ones are herbivores? Obviously herbivores are things that eat only producers. Carnivores eat only meat. And then if you take a look at this, find those omnivores, the things that are kind of in two different worlds, where they're eating both producers and other meat. Okay? So please take time to do that. Now, the last thing here is last thing I want to talk about is there is another component here that wasn't listed on the other pyramids. So please take a look at this. If you take a look at the right-hand side, there is an organism called decomposers. That was not shown on these other models. There is a very important role that decomposers play in these trophic levels. And what I want you to do is I want you to critically think, look at this diagram. What are the decomposers doing? What is their importance? What would happen if we didn't have decomposers? So I need you to answer that on your note sheet as well. Okay? All right. So thank you for following along with energy in trophic levels or energy in ecosystems. Once you get this done, you need to move on to the carbon cycle video. Thank you for watching.